Hello to all social studies fans out there. Today we learn about the European exploration of the Americas. Before we get into it, here's a couple terms for you. The New World and the Old World. Now, the New World and the Old World don't actually mean that any of the continents are older than each other. These are just terms that are written from the perspective of Europeans and Asians and Africans as they discovered the fact that there were other continents in the world. All right, so in gray, we have what we now call the Old World, right? The world that was known to people of Europe, Asia, and Africa before 1492. And then in green, we have what we call the New World, right? The continents that were then, that they got to know about later. Okay, and so these terms themselves are a little bit Eurocentric, but they are terms that were widely used since the era of explorations and continue to be used to a certain degree today. So it is worth knowing about these terms, even though they are very imperfect. All right, so New World and Old World. Okay, so question, why did Europeans sail to what we call the New World? Right? Why did they make that big trip across the Atlantic Ocean to eventually find out that there were two massive continents in the Western Hemisphere of the world? Why did they do that? Well, Europe wasn't particularly special in the 1400s. We learned in the Jared Diamond video that we watched that different parts of the world progressed at different rates because of their access to different plants and different animals, and also because of their ability to trade with each other. And so we know that there were civilizations in Asia, there were civilizations in Europe, and there were civilizations in North Africa that had developed metal tools, they had developed guns, they now had many diseases in them, so they had guns, germs, and steel, but Europeans were not the only ones who had those things, right? In fact, the Chinese were quite a bit more powerful than Europeans were in the 1400s. And so the Chinese Empire, they also could have colonized North America and South America quite easily. A big difference, though, is that China was not particularly interested in doing such a thing at that time. China had decided that they were going to be a little bit more isolationist, which means that they were going to focus on themselves and not interact more than they have to with other countries. And so they were not the ones to make the trip across, it would be the Pacific Ocean for them, to make contact with North and South America. Okay, but for many reasons, Europe was interested in doing such a thing. Europe had many reasons to be motivated to make such a large trip across the Atlantic Ocean and to come across the Americas. Right. So let's find out what those reasons were. Okay, so here we have in the 1400s, Europe was not more powerful or advanced than China and the Middle East. And China was actually the superpower of history with wealth, population, and technology. However, there were cultural reasons and there were economic drivers, economic reasons for which Europeans wanted to go and explore. And then they came across the New World. Okay, so reason number one, and you can put this in your notes, of course, Europe developed a middle class of merchants and artisans, and they helped grow cities. And those cities required goods. You're going to learn in another video you're going to watch as part of this lesson that Europeans were desperately in need of some natural resources, right? Europe was running out of natural resources, and so they were searching further and further to try to get those natural resources for their growing population. Reason number two, the capture of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks in 1453 made using the Silk Road to Asia difficult. So for quite some time now, Europe had been connected to Asia through the Silk Road. However, as you learned in the Silk Road lesson, travel by land became dangerous. And one of the reasons why it became dangerous for Europeans to travel by land into the Silk Road was because of some changes in leadership in the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so the Ottoman Empire was sort of the connecting piece between Europe and Asia. And there was a new group of people, the Turks, who had captured the city of Constantinople, all right, which is right here. And so it was no longer possible for Europeans to use the Silk Road. Okay, but they got used to having all this awesome stuff that they acquired through the Silk Road, and they wanted to continue getting those things, right? They were used to getting, spices from India. They were used to getting all sorts of things from, the Far East. There were lots of things that they wanted to still acquire, and so they needed to build big boats to find new sea routes, right? They needed to find new ways of getting that stuff. Okay. Number 3, monarchs wanted new sources of revenue and began using overseas trade as a source of wealth, right? So because the Silk Road was in decline, monarchs like kings and queens, especially one queen that's very important for today's story is Queen Isabella of Spain. Monarchs like her, they wanted to start using boats more than they already were in order to establish new trade networks, new trade routes with faraway countries. Reason number 4 would be the Renaissance, right? There are also cultural reasons why Europeans made this big trip into the Americas and then decided to colonize the Americas. One of those cultural reasons was they would be going through the Renaissance, right? So they now had a lot of curiosity about other lands and peoples. There was this whole new age of discovery. There was many inventions. Many of those inventions they had actually gotten from other civilizations in Asia and the Middle East, but they were building on them, and there was a lot of interest in building new knowledge and discoveries, and a lot of ideas were being exchanged through the use of the printing press, which will be important for this story. Okay. Reason number 5, technological advances made large trips possible. So Europeans could no longer access the Silk Road on land, and so they needed to build bigger boats that could travel further. On top of that, as you're going to learn in another video today, Europeans were running out of fish, and so they needed to go further and further into the ocean to catch fish, and so they had to build bigger and more stable boats which could go further. And so they came up with new innovations and new inventions for their boats, making them far more seaworthy. Right. So here are a few of those inventions. Right. We have the caravel, which is a new type of sail, which allowed them to sail directly into the wind instead of always having to go with the wind. There was the astrolabe. They were doing much better with maps. They're coming up with way better maps, which allow them to understand how to travel by sea much more safely. They invented the sextant, right? The sextant allowed them to determine at which latitude they were positioned, which allowed them, between having their map and using their sextant, well, then they know where they are and where they're going, right? Which allowed them to travel more safely. And they used the mariner's compass. Okay, so these were all inventions that they had that allowed Europeans to travel more safely. Now, some of these inventions, of course, they had not come up with themselves. Some of them they had borrowed from the Arabs, right, in the Middle East. Some of them they had borrowed from the Chinese in East Asia, right? And so also the fact that they were able to do a lot of trade with other people from other civilizations gave them an advantage as well. Okay. Reason number 6, men who wanted to improve their social status were attracted to the fame and fortune that came with being an explorer. So there was this famous dude called Marco Polo who had gone on this really big trip out to Asia, and he was a European guy, and he came back and he published a book, and it told everybody about his trip, right? It told everybody about his adventures, and there was a whole generation of young men who grew up having read the book that Marco Polo wrote, and so they wanted to become adventurers too. They wanted to become explorers. They thought that, oh, that's the life for me. That sounds so exciting to go out and discover new civilizations and new people and stuff. And one of those people who grew up reading Marco Polo's book was this guy over here, Christopher Columbus, right? And so he became interested in geography, became interested in sailing, and he will eventually become a really important person. All right, so those were the first 6 reasons. The 7th reason will require you to go and watch another video. So I don't want you to watch the whole video. It's a super long video. I just want you to watch the clips, right? So if you start at 22 minutes and 10 seconds and then watch for 4 minutes and 40 seconds, well, then you'll get to 26 minutes and 50 seconds. And then skip ahead to 37 minutes and 50 seconds and continue watching until 53 minutes and 10 seconds. Okay, so the name of the video that I want you to watch is called America Before Columbus. It is the next video in this playlist that you're currently watching. So you can just skip ahead to that video and watch the clips that you're supposed to watch, and then come back to this video and continue watching. Okay, so I'm going to get you to pause this video right now and go watch that other video. So go and do that now. Okay, welcome back. So you just watched 2 clips from America Before Columbus, and you're back in this video now, and here is the next part of the notes based on what you just watched. In those 2 clips that you just watched, we learned that Europe is in need of natural resources, right? So you saw that they're in need of meat, right? Animal populations are on the decline. They're in need of fish, especially because the rivers and the lakes and even the sea, the oceans nearby are overfished and running out of fish. And also they're running out of wood. Europeans are using wood like crazy, right? They're building cities, they're building massive cathedrals, they're building boats. All of these require a lot of lumber, a lot of wood. And so they need to get access to more natural resources, right? And so you learned about the fact that Christopher Columbus, he wanted to establish a new route by sea to get to Asia, right? So his goal was to get to Asia. And he instead ended up in the Americas, right? And nobody in Europe or Asia or Africa knew that the Americas existed, all right? So he arrived there and encountered a new group of people, right? And so these were his four voyages, his 4 trips that he made, right? So his first trips took him past the Bahamas, right? The island of Cuba, the island of Hispaniola, and then he went back to Europe. And he, as you saw in the video that you just watched, he wrote a letter to Queen Isabella, letting her know, like, hey, I made it. There's some people here that we could convert to Christianity. There's a lot of natural resources here that we could use and we could take back to Spain. And so she thought, hey, this sounds great. And so she sent a bunch of boats next time, right? And so the Europeans are going to keep coming back to the Americas to find more stuff, right? And so Christopher Columbus, the first group of people that he encountered in the Caribbean, they were known as the Taino people. And so here is something that he wrote about the Taino people. He said that they are the best people in the world, and above all, the gentlest. They were, they very willingly showed my people where the water was, and they themselves carried the full barrels to the boat and took great delight in pleasing us. They became so much our friends that it was a marvel. Well, doesn't that sound nice? The problem is that he saw this nice behavior by the Taino people as an opportunity for him and his men to exploit them. And so he actually enslaved the Taino. He made them his slaves, and anybody who did not listen to him was murdered in a very vicious way, right? So the Taino people were treated terribly by Columbus and the other conquistadors. 20 years later, most of the Taino were dead, and the other indigenous peoples of the Caribbean were either enslaved or they were under attack by the conquistadors, by the Europeans. So Europeans showed a great interest in the Americas. So at first, it was especially the Spanish and the Portuguese who were very interested in coming to the Americas. And then other Europeans became interested as well, like the English and the French and the Dutch. And so this map here shows you which regions of the Americas different European empires decided to explore, right? And so you see that what we now call Central America, right? That was mainly explored by the Spanish. And then once they had conquered much of Central America, then the Spanish started going into South America, and they came across the Inca Empire. And you're going to learn about that part of history pretty soon. And you can see that the English made their way into North America. The French as well made their way into North America. Okay, so a lot of these soldiers who were fighting on behalf of the Spanish or the Portuguese, we call them conquistadors. Right? And you often see them wearing their metal armor and their helmets. They've got their swords. Those are conquistadors, which means conquerors. Right? So in your partial notes, there's a section on conquistadors, and you can write, these are men who left Europe to become explorers, soldiers, and adventurers at the service of the Portuguese and Spanish empires. Okay, so many conquistadors were very ordinary men in Europe who had heard about the adventures of Christopher Columbus, and they were looking for riches and glory. They saw this as an opportunity for them to increase their social status, to become rich, right? And to go and make a name for themselves, right? A lot of these were just ordinary guys who maybe they were farmers, but they were not going to inherit any land from their parents. Maybe they didn't have many other opportunities, or maybe they were retired military guys who just wanted to go and get rich. And so there was a wide variety of different people who became conquistadors, and they made their way to the Americas, and they conquered many parts of the New World for the Spanish and Portuguese empires. So one famous conquistador is called Hernan Cortez. And so in your partial notes, you're going to see there's a picture of Hernan Cortez. Please write his name underneath his picture, right? So he traveled to the island of Hispaniola with a group of conquistadors in 1504, and he later made his way into Central and parts of North America, and he was the guy who conquered much of Central America, right? And he had a cousin by the name of Francisco Pizarro, and he decided to go down to South America. He had heard about his cousin Hernan Cortez having conquered much of Central America, where he became extremely rich, and Francisco Pizarro wanted to do the same thing. So you can write his name underneath his picture. Pizarro went to South America, and he encountered the Inca, right? So he had grown up as a pink herder, and later he joined the army and became a captain. And so he heard about El Dorado. So I didn't really talk about El Dorado. El Dorado was this sort of myth, this story that many Spanish conquistadors talked about. It was this mythical city that didn't actually exist, but this idea that there was a city made of gold. And so Spanish people were looking for this city, right? So they never found a city made of gold, but they found a lot of gold in the Americas, okay? And so Hernan Cortez, he had conquered much of Central and a little bit of North America, whereas Pizarro, he decides to go onto the west side of South America, and he encounters the Inca, right? So the Incas, they are a massive empire, a big empire here in the western parts of South America, okay? Oh, well, here's a map. Yeah, let's go with that. So we have the Mayas here, we have the Aztecs here, and then we have the Incas. Okay, so you're going to learn about these three empires in the next video that you're going to watch right away here. And I hope you learn a few things, and I hope you have a good day.